The frigid waters of the Mississippi River rushed into Beatrice Grayson's lungs as she plunged beneath the surface, her wedding dress billowing around her like a ghostly cloud in the moonlight. Death seemed preferable to the life awaiting her as the wife of Jasper Harrington, a man 3 times her age with a reputation for cruelty that extended throughout St. Louis and beyond. It was March of 1875, and at 20 years old, Beatrice had been raised to be obedient. But when her father announced her betrothal to the wealthy businessman who had saved the family's failing finances, something inside her broke. The night before her wedding, with snow still clinging to the ground, she made her decision. She had slipped from her bedroom window, fled to the river, and with one final prayer, jumped into the icy waters. The current was stronger than she had anticipated. Her limbs grew numb almost instantly, and the heavy fabric of her dress, the same one she was to be married in the following day, pulled her downward. The irony wasn't lost on her, even as she struggled against the inevitable. Her lungs burned, begging for air she couldn't give them. Just as darkness began to close in around her vision, something powerful gripped her waist. Strong hands pulled her upward, breaking the surface. She gasped, water spilling from her mouth as air rushed painfully into her lungs. "Easy now," a deep voice said as she was hoisted over the side of a small fishing boat. "You're safe." Through blurred vision, Beatrice made out the silhouette of a man against the night sky. He wrapped a rough blanket around her trembling shoulders. "Why in tarnation would a lady like yourself jump into the river in the dead of night?" he asked, his voice carrying a slight Western drawl unlike the refined tones she was accustomed to in St. Louis society. Beatrice couldn't answer. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably as he rowed them to shore, her wedding dress clinging to her like a second skin. When they reached land, he lifted her from the boat with surprising gentleness. "My name's Thomas Everett," he said, setting her down on the riverbank. "Most folks call me Tom. I was checking my lines when I saw you take that leap." Beatrice finally found her voice, though it came out as a raspy whisper. I cannot go back. They will find me." Thomas studied her face in the moonlight, noticing the desperation in her eyes. Without asking further questions, he nodded once. "My horse is tied up just beyond those trees. Can you walk?" She attempted to stand but swayed dangerously. Without hesitation, Thomas scooped her into his arms and carried her through the trees to where a magnificent chestnut stallion waited patiently. "We need to get you dry and warm," he said, lifting her onto the horse before mounting behind her. "I've got a camp set up a few miles upriver." As they rode away from St. Louis, Beatrice felt a strange mixture of terror and relief. She had escaped one fate only to place herself entirely in the hands of a stranger. Yet there was something in the steady way Thomas Everett held her against him, something in his calm, assured manner that made her feel safer than she had in months. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rhythm of the horse's hooves. Thomas merely nodded, urging his horse faster as they disappeared into the night. By dawn, they had reached his modest camp nestled in a small clearing by the river. Thomas helped Beatrice dismount, her wedding dress now stiff with dried river water and mud. Her fingers were blue with cold and her lips had taken on a concerning tinge of purple. "Here," he said, digging through his saddlebags. He produced a worn but clean shirt and trousers. "You should change out of those wet clothes before you catch your death. I'll turn my back." Beatrice clutched the offered garments, embarrassed but practical enough to recognize the necessity. "You are very kind, Mr. Everett." "Just Tom," he corrected, turning to tend to his horse while giving her privacy. The clothes were far too large, but they were dry. Beatrice rolled up the sleeves and pant legs, using a length of rope Tom provided as a makeshift belt. She had never worn men's clothing before and found the freedom of movement surprising after years of restrictive corsets and heavy skirts. "I have some coffee," Tom offered once she was changed, already stoking a small fire. "And jerky, though it's not much of a breakfast for a lady." "I am grateful for anything," she said, settling down near the fire. With the immediate danger past, reality began to settle in. "I have nothing to pay you with." Tom handed her a tin cup of steaming coffee. "I didn't pull you from the river expecting payment, miss." "Beatrice," she supplied. "Beatrice Grayson." "Miss Grayson," he acknowledged with a nod. "I'm heading west. Got some land waiting for me near Roswell in the New Mexico territory. You're welcome to travel with me until you find someplace safe." Beatrice stared into her coffee. "They will be looking for me by now. My fiancé is not a man who accepts being denied what he believes is his." Tom studied her over the rim of his own cup. He was older than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of faded denim. His brown hair was longer than was fashionable in the city, tied back with a leather cord, and a short beard covered his jawline. "A forced marriage," he guessed, his expression darkening. Beatrice nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "My father owed him a considerable sum. I was to be the payment." "That's not marriage," Tom said firmly. "That's trading in flesh." He took a long drink of his coffee, then added, "We'll need to move quickly. How far does your fiancé's influence reach?" "He has connections throughout Missouri and Illinois. Business partners in Kansas City and Chicago. I don't know beyond that." Tom nodded thoughtfully. "Then we head southwest." "It'll be a hard journey, especially for a city woman, but if you're determined." "I would rather die on the trail than return to St. Louis," Beatrice said with unexpected conviction. A hint of respect flickered in Tom's eyes. "Then we leave within the hour." "Is there anything from your wedding dress you need to keep?" Beatrice glanced at the sodden heap of white fabric. "Nothing. I want no reminders." They packed quickly, Tom efficiently breaking down his camp while Beatrice bundled her ruined dress and pushed it deep into the river, watching as the current carried away her past life. Tom fashioned a makeshift hat from a spare bandana to shield her fair skin from the sun that was now rising over the horizon. "Ever ridden proper?" he asked as he tightened the cinch on his saddle. "Only side saddle, and not often," she admitted. "You'll have to learn. We've got a long way to go." He showed her how to mount and position herself, then swung up behind her. His chest pressed against her back as he reached around to take the reins, and Beatrice felt a flush creep into her cheeks at the unfamiliar proximity. "Ready?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. With one final glance at the river that had both nearly claimed her life and provided her escape, Beatrice nodded. "Ready." They rode hard for 3 days, keeping to less traveled paths and crossing into Kansas territory. Tom was a patient teacher, showing Beatrice how to ride properly, how to make camp, and how to cover their tracks. By the 4th day, her hands were blistered, her thighs chafed raw from riding, and her fair skin had turned an angry red despite the bandana hat. But she never complained. "You're tougher than you look," Tom commented as they made camp that evening. He handed her a small jar of salve for her hands. Most city women would have been demanding to turn back by now. "I have nothing to go back to," Beatrice said simply, wincing as she applied the salve. Tom nodded, respecting her resilience. "We'll reach the next town tomorrow. Need to resupply and get you some proper clothes. Can't have you wearing my old things all the way to New Mexico." Beatrice looked down at herself. The novelty of wearing trousers had worn off, but the practicality hadn't. "I rather like not having skirts to tangle around my legs." A rare smile crossed Tom's face. "Might cause a stir in town." Then I shall have to endure being a proper lady one more time, she sighed. Though I draw the line at corsets. Tom's smile widened. I reckon that's fair enough. The town of Liberty, Kansas, was little more than a collection of wooden buildings clustered around a dusty main street. But to Beatrice, it was the first test of her new identity. Tom had coached her on their cover story. She was his widowed cousin, traveling west to start anew after the death of her husband. The general store owner's wife, a kindly woman named Mrs. Peterson, helped Beatrice select practical dresses, sturdy boots, and even trousers similar to those worn by frontier women who worked the land. When Mrs. Peterson suggested a fashionable corset, Beatrice politely declined. My cousin is of the practical sort, Tom explained, standing awkwardly among the women's garments. We've got a long journey ahead. Heading where? Mrs. Peterson asked, measuring Beatrice for a proper hat. Roswell, Tom replied. Got a ranch waiting. Roswell, that's mighty far. You'd do better settling somewhere in Colorado. Heard New Mexico's still wild as can be. That's the appeal, Tom said with a slight smile. Freedom to build something of my own. While Beatrice changed into one of her new outfits, a simple blue calico dress with fewer layers than she was accustomed to, Tom purchased supplies. Ammunition, preserved foods, medicine, and tools they might need on the journey. As they prepared to leave town, a commotion near the telegraph office caught their attention. A well-dressed man was posting something on the community board. Wait here, Tom instructed, leaving Beatrice with their packages by the general store while he casually made his way closer to investigate. Beatrice watched anxiously as Tom read whatever had been posted, his posture stiffening. When he returned, his expression was grim. Your fiancé works quickly, he said quietly, taking the packages from her arms. There's a reward for information leading to your return, $500. Beatrice felt the blood drain from her face. A substantial sum. Enough to tempt many in these parts, Tom agreed, helping her mount their newly purchased second horse, a gentle mare. We need to leave. Now. They departed Liberty with more haste than they'd entered, riding south and west until the town disappeared behind them. That night, as they made camp in a secluded grove, Beatrice finally asked the question that had been haunting her. Why are you helping me? You could turn me in and claim the reward. $500 would buy a lot of cattle for your ranch. Tom was silent for a long moment as he tended the fire. My sister, he finally said, his voice low. She was married off to pay my father's debts when I was 16. She was 18. Died in childbirth 2 years later. He looked up at Beatrice, his eyes reflecting the firelight. I couldn't save her, but I can help you. The simple honesty of his words touched something deep within Beatrice. I'm sorry about your sister. Tom nodded, accepting her sympathy. Get some rest. We've got a lot of ground to cover tomorrow. As the weeks passed, they traveled steadily westward, crossing from Kansas into Colorado territory. The terrain grew increasingly rugged, the settlements fewer and farther between. Tom taught Beatrice how to shoot his spare revolver, how to identify edible plants, and how to read the weather from the clouds. She proved a quick learner, her city-bred refinement giving way to practical frontier skills. Their routine developed a comfortable familiarity. During the day, they rode side by side, Tom pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of his travels. At night, they would make camp, prepare a simple meal and sleep beneath the stars, always maintaining a respectful distance. But something was changing between them. Beatrice found herself watching Tom when he wasn't looking, the confident way he handled his horse, the gentleness in his hands when he dressed a wound she received from a fall, the rare smile that transformed his serious features when she mastered a new skill. For his part, Tom caught himself wondering about the woman Beatrice was becoming away from the constraints of society. She hummed while they rode, songs he didn't recognize but enjoyed nonetheless. She had stopped flinching at the sight of insects and had even helped skin a rabbit for their dinner without complaint. Her golden hair, once elaborately styled, now hung in a simple braid down her back, streaked lighter by the sun. Her skin had tanned to a healthy glow, and her eyes, a warm amber brown, had lost the haunted look they'd held when he first pulled her from the river. One evening in late April, as they camped in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains, Beatrice broached a subject they had both avoided. "Tom," she began hesitantly, "what happens when we reach Roswell?" He looked up from cleaning his rifle, his hands stilling. "What do you mean, I mean?" She hesitated, gathering her courage. "I have no family there, no connections, no means to support myself." Tom set the rifle aside. "I figured you'd stay at the ranch, at least until you decide what you want to do." "As what?" Beatrice pressed. "Your ward. Your servant, as my friend," Tom said simply. "Someone who's traveled a hard road with me and earned her place." Beatrice absently twisted a loose thread on her sleeve. "People will talk. People always talk," Tom replied with a shrug. "Doesn't mean we have to listen." But they both knew it wasn't that simple. A single woman living unchaperoned with a bachelor would invite scandal even in the relatively forgiving atmosphere of the frontier. Beatrice had escaped one compromising situation only to potentially create another. "I could find work in town," she suggested. "Perhaps as a teacher or shopkeeper's assistant." Tom nodded slowly, though something like disappointment flickered across his features. "If that's what you want." "What do you want, Tom?" The question slipped out before she could reconsider. Their eyes met across the campfire, and for a moment neither spoke. The crackling flames filled the silence between them. "I want you to be free to choose your own path," he finally said. "That's all I've wanted since I pulled you from that river." It wasn't quite an answer, but Beatrice didn't press. The conversation shifted to more immediate concerns: the mountain pass they would navigate the next day, the supplies they would need to restock at the next settlement. But something had changed. A door opened that couldn't be closed again. As they crossed into New Mexico territory in early May, the landscape transformed. Towering pines gave way to juniper and piñon, and the mountains receded into expansive mesas and dramatic canyons. The heat was different here, dry and intense during the day but cooling significantly at night. "It's beautiful," Beatrice remarked as they crested a rise that offered a panoramic view of the territory that stretched before them. "So different from Missouri." "That's why I chose it," Tom said, his gaze taking in the landscape with obvious affection. "No one telling you who to be or how to live, just open land and honest work." They were 3 days from Roswell when disaster struck. They had stopped to water the horses at a small creek when Tom suddenly tensed, his hand moving to his holstered revolver. "Get down," he ordered quietly, his eyes scanning the ridge above them. Beatrice had learned not to question such commands. She dropped low beside her mare, heart pounding as she followed Tom's gaze. 3 riders had appeared on the ridge, watching them. "Who are they?" she whispered. "Trouble," Tom replied grimly. "Could be bandits, could be bounty hunters." The men began descending toward the creek, spreading out to block any escape route. "Miss Grayson," one called out, confirming Tom's worst suspicion. "No need to run anymore. Your father and Mr. Harrington are mighty worried about you." Beatrice felt ice water in her veins despite the warm day. "How did they find us?" "Telegraph lines reach further west every year," Tom said, his mind racing. "That poster we saw back in Liberty must have spread." The lead rider, a hard-faced man with a star pinned to his vest, approached cautiously. "Mr. Everett, I presume? I'm Marshal Doyle." I've been authorized to return Miss Grayson to St. Louis and to arrest you for kidnapping." "I wasn't kidnapped," Beatrice said firmly, standing despite Tom's attempt to keep her hidden. "I left of my own free will." The marshal's expression remained impassive. "That's not how Mr. Harrington tells it. Says this man took you from your bed the night before your wedding. $500 is the reward for your safe return and another $500 for his capture." "He's lying," Beatrice insisted, moving to stand beside Tom. "This man saved my life when I jumped into the Mississippi to escape a forced marriage." The marshal exchanged glances with his companions. "Miss, you've been away from civilized society for quite some time now. Perhaps your recollection has been influenced." Tom's hand hadn't left his revolver. "We don't want trouble, Marshal, but Miss Grayson isn't going anywhere against her will. Not while I'm breathing." The tension in the air was palpable. Beatrice could see the calculation in the marshal's eyes, 3 armed men against one, but that one looked determined enough to take at least some of them with him. "There's $1,000 riding on this," the marshal said, as if that explained everything. "And a telegram from a very powerful man in St. Louis." "And there's a woman's freedom at stake," Tom countered. "Which matters more to you, Marshal, money or justice?" One of the other men, younger and more impatient, moved his hand toward his holster. "This is taking too long, Doyle." "Let's just—" The crack of a gunshot interrupted him, but it wasn't Tom who had fired. It was Beatrice, holding the small revolver Tom had given her, pointing it skyward. "The next one won't be a warning," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I am not property to be returned to an owner. I am a free woman making my own choices." The marshal studied her with new interest. "You seem mighty sure of yourself, Miss Grayson." "I am," she replied. "And if you force me to return, I will only escape again, perhaps less successfully next time." An uncomfortable silence followed. Then the marshal sighed heavily. "Harrington didn't mention she was armed and dangerous," he muttered to his companions. To Beatrice, he said, "I need something to tell the man who hired me. He's not one to accept failure lightly." Tom spoke up. "Tell him she's dead. Tell him you found evidence we were attacked by Comanches or bandits. He'll have to accept it eventually." The marshal considered this, then nodded slowly. "Might work. But you'd have to disappear completely, Miss Grayson. No letters home, no using your real name." "I have no home to write to," Beatrice said firmly, "and I've been considering a new name anyway." The tension gradually eased as the marshal made his decision. "I don't much like the idea of forcing a woman to marry. Never did sit right with me." He removed his hat, wiping sweat from his brow. "I'll tell Harrington I found evidence of an attack but no bodies. Let him draw his own conclusions." Relief flooded through Beatrice, but Tom remained cautious. "And the reward? Consider it forfeit," the marshal said with a wry smile. "Cost of doing the right thing, I suppose." As the 3 men prepared to leave, the marshal turned back. "Word of advice. Change your appearance, Miss Grayson. Cut that pretty hair, maybe. And Mr. Everett, I'd avoid St. Louis business connections for your ranch. Harrington has a long memory and longer reach." With those parting words, the men rode away, leaving Tom and Beatrice alone by the creek. "You were willing to fight them," Beatrice said once they were gone. "All 3. Tom began checking their horses, his movements betraying lingering tension. Wouldn't have been the smart choice, but yes. "Why?" He paused, looking at her directly. "Because some things are worth fighting for." The simplicity of his answer stole her breath. In that moment, something crystallized between them, an understanding that transcended words. That night, as they made camp for the final time before reaching Roswell, Beatrice took the marshal's advice. With Tom's knife in her own steady hand, she cut her long golden hair to just below her chin. The shorn locks scattered in the breeze, Another tie to her past life severed. How do I look? She asked, turning to Tom, who had watched the transformation in silence. His eyes softened as he took in her appearance. Like a woman who makes her own choices. She smiled, the first truly unguarded smile she'd given since he'd pulled her from the river. It feels right. They sat closer than usual that night, the shared danger having dissolved some invisible barrier between them. As the stars emerged overhead, Beatrice found the courage to ask what had been on her mind. "Did you mean what you said? About me staying at your ranch?" Tom nodded, his gaze fixed on the fire. "It's not much yet, just land and a small cabin I built last year, but yes, I meant it." "As your friend," she said, echoing his earlier words. Tom looked up then, meeting her eyes across the small space between them. "For now, unless." "Unless." She prompted when he didn't continue. He seemed to gather his courage. "Unless you might consider something more. Someday. When you're ready." The words hung in the air between them, full of possibility. Beatrice felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire spreading through her chest. "I think," she said carefully, "that someday might come sooner than either of us expected." Tom's expression changed subtly, hope replacing uncertainty. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he reached across the space between them and took her hand in his. His palm was rough with calluses, warm against her skin that had grown tougher on their journey but was still softer than his. "Beatrice," he said, her name sounding like a prayer on his lips. "I never expected to find someone like you." "Certainly not fishing you out of a river in the middle of the night," she laughed softly. "Life has a strange way of bringing people together." "That it does," he agreed. Then, with characteristic directness, "I'm falling in love with you. Have been since Kansas, I reckon." The admission, simple and honest, touched her deeply. "I think I've been falling too. I just didn't know how to name it until now." They sat in comfortable silence, hands still joined as the fire burned low. When Beatrice finally spoke again, her voice was thoughtful. "I want to build something too, Tom, a life of my own choosing. I never had that before." "We can build it together," he offered, "if that's what you want." She squeezed his hand. "I'd like that very much." The next morning they rode the final distance to Roswell. The settlement was smaller than Beatrice had imagined. A collection of adobe and wooden buildings clustered around a central plaza. People of different backgrounds, Anglo settlers, Hispanic families who had lived in the territory for generations, and native traders moved about their business, giving the town a vibrant energy despite its modest size. Tom pointed out landmarks as they rode through town: the general store, the saloon, the small church, and the sheriff's office. People nodded in greeting, recognizing Tom from his previous visits to purchase the land and build his cabin. "Everett," called a burly man exiting the general store. "Heard you were heading back this way. Got your place all set up." "Working on it, Jackson," Tom replied, dismounting and shaking the man's hand. "This is Miss Beatrice Gray," he said, shortening her surname slightly. "My friend from back east." Mr. Jackson tipped his hat to Beatrice. "Madam, welcome to Roswell. Not as fancy as what you're used to, I expect, but we get by." "It's lovely," Beatrice said sincerely, taking in the beautiful landscape surrounding the town. "I'm looking forward to calling it home." They purchased final supplies in town before heading to Tom's ranch, located about 5 miles outside Roswell. As they crested a small rise, Tom pulled his horse to a stop. "There it is," he said, gesturing to the valley below. Beatrice followed his gaze. A modest cabin sat nestled against a backdrop of juniper trees, with a small barn and corral beside it. A creek wound through the property, providing precious water in the arid landscape. Beyond the immediate homestead stretched acres of grassland suitable for cattle. "It's perfect," she breathed, able to see the potential in what others might view as humble beginnings. Tom watched her reaction closely. "It needs work, lots of it. Then we'll work," she said simply. As they approached the cabin, Beatrice felt a strange sense of homecoming despite never having seen this place before. Tom helped her dismount and they stood for a moment, taking in what would be their shared future. "Welcome home, Beatrice," Tom said softly. She turned to him, her shortened hair catching the late afternoon sunlight. "Thank you for fishing me out of that river, Thomas Everett." He smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "Best fishing I ever did." With gentle reverence, he leaned down and kissed her for the first time. It was a promise, an affirmation of the journey they had taken and the one still to come. The days that followed established a new rhythm to their lives. They worked from sunrise to sunset, repairing the cabin, tending the small garden Tom had started, and preparing for the cattle he planned to purchase. Beatrice discovered abilities she never knew she possessed: strength to haul water, patience to mend fences, creativity to make the sparse cabin more comfortable with limited resources. News from town trickled out to them through occasional visitors and their own trips for supplies. No one questioned Beatrice's presence, accepting Tom's vague explanation that she was a family friend from back east seeking a fresh start. In a territory where many came to reinvent themselves, few asked for detailed histories. A month after their arrival, Tom rode into town alone to arrange for the purchase of a small herd of cattle. When he returned, he brought not only news of the pending purchase but also a surprise. "Preacher Wilson is coming through next week," he said as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Travels a circuit, marrying folks and baptizing babies wherever he's needed." Beatrice looked at him curiously. "Is that your way of proposing, Thomas Everett?" A flush crept up his neck, visible even in the fading light. "Reckon I'm not doing a very good job of it, am I?" He shifted to face her more directly. "Beatrice, these past months with you have been the best of my life. I know it hasn't been long, but out here, time measures differently. I love you. I want to build this life with you properly as husband and wife." Tears pricked at Beatrice's eyes as she smiled. "Yes," she said simply. "I would be honored to be your wife." The wedding took place the following week, a simple ceremony attended by the handful of neighbors within riding distance. Beatrice wore her blue calico dress with wildflowers in her short hair. Tom had purchased a new shirt for the occasion, but otherwise looked much as he always did: strong, steady, and now undeniably happy. Preacher Wilson, a jovial man with a shock of white hair, performed the ceremony on their porch, pronouncing them husband and wife just as the sun began to set over the New Mexico landscape. There was no elaborate reception, just a shared meal with their neighbors and a few bottles of whiskey to toast the union. As their guests departed, leaving the newlyweds alone, Tom took Beatrice's hand. "Mrs. Everett," he said, testing the name. "I like the sound of that," she replied, leaning into his embrace. That night, they truly became husband and wife, discovering each other with the same patience and care that had characterized their journey from the Mississippi to New Mexico. Beatrice found none of the fear she had associated with marriage in her previous life, only joy in the connection they shared. Summer turned to fall, and with it came prosperity. The cattle purchase proved wise, with the small herd thriving on the abundant grassland. Tom and Beatrice established a reputation as fair traders and hard workers. They expanded the cabin, adding a second room and improving the roof before winter set in. On Christmas Eve, as they sat before the fire in their cozy home, Beatrice shared news of her own. "I have a gift for you," she said, taking Tom's hand and placing it gently on her still flat stomach. But it won't arrive until summer." Tom's eyes widened, then filled with a joy so profound it nearly overwhelmed him. "A baby, you're certain?" She nodded, her own happiness mirroring his. "Doctor Taylor confirmed it when I was in town last week. I wanted to be sure before I told you." He gathered her in his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I never thought I could be this happy," he confessed against her hair. "Nor I," she whispered back. "It's a far cry from where I was a year ago." Tom pulled back slightly, cupping her face in his hands. "Do you ever regret it? Jumping into that river, leaving everything behind?" Beatrice shook her head without hesitation. "Never. That leap brought me to you, to this life. I would jump 1,000 times over to end up exactly here." Spring of 1876 brought new beginnings to the Everett Ranch. The cattle delivered healthy calves, the garden yielded its first abundant crop, and Beatrice's body rounded with their growing child. They received occasional news from the wider world, tales of gold in the Black Hills, tensions with native tribes further north, the centennial celebrations planned back east, but their focus remained on their own expanding world. Tom built a cradle from juniper wood, carefully sanding each piece until it was smooth as silk. Beatrice sewed tiny garments from flour sacks bleached white in the sun. They discussed names, dreams for their child's future, ways to ensure their little one would always know the freedom they had both fought to achieve. On a sweltering July afternoon, with a midwife from town in attendance, Beatrice gave birth to a son. They named him Samuel, after Tom's father, with the middle name William to honor Beatrice's beloved grandfather, the only family member she truly missed. "He has your eyes," Tom said in wonder, cradling his son while sitting beside Beatrice's bed. "Same shade of brown." "But your chin," Beatrice observed tiredly, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny face. "Stubborn already." Tom laughed softly. "With parents like us, he's bound to be determined." Samuel grew strong, thriving in the clear New Mexico air. By his first birthday, he was taking tentative steps across the porch, chasing after the chickens Tom had acquired that spring. Beatrice discovered a talent for cheesemaking, selling her products in town for a tidy profit that she proudly contributed to the ranch's finances. Their second anniversary found them more prosperous than either had dared hope. The cattle herd had doubled, and Tom had hired 2 hands to help with the increasing workload. The cabin had expanded again, now a proper house with 3 rooms and plans for more. "Did you ever imagine this?" Beatrice asked as they sat on their porch watching Samuel play in the yard. "When you pulled me from the river that night," Tom smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling with happiness. "Not specifically this, no. But I knew you were special from the moment you opened those fiery eyes and told me you weren't going back. I was terrified," she confessed, "but something told me to trust you." "Best decision you ever made," he teased. She leaned against his shoulder. "Second best." Best was jumping into that river in the first place. In the fall of 1877, a letter arrived that shattered their peaceful existence. It bore the return address of a law firm in St. Louis and was addressed to Mrs. Thomas Everett, a name Beatrice had never used in any correspondence back east. With trembling hands, she opened it while Tom watched anxiously. "My father is dead," she said after scanning the contents. "Apparently he confessed the truth about my marriage arrangement on his deathbed. This is from his lawyer." She continued reading, her expression changing from shock to disbelief. "Jasper Harrington has been arrested for fraud and other crimes. It seems my father wasn't his only victim." Tom moved to sit beside her, placing a protective arm around her shoulders. "Does anyone know you're alive?" She shook her head. "The lawyer writes that my father believed I had drowned that night. He's simply contacting any possible relatives as part of settling the estate. She looked up at Tom. I've inherited everything: the house, the business, what remains of the family fortune after Harrington's deception was uncovered. They sat in stunned silence, the implications slowly sinking in. What do you want to do? Tom finally asked, his voice carefully neutral. Beatrice refolded the letter, her decision already made. Nothing. Beatrice Grayson died in the Mississippi River over 2 years ago. I'm Beatrice Everett now, and this is my home. She took his hand, squeezing it firmly. Though I may write to this lawyer, anonymously, suggesting the estate be liquidated and the proceeds donated to a home for women seeking escape from similar situations. Relief and love flooded Tom's expression. I would support whatever you chose, but I'm mighty glad that's your decision. Did you doubt it would be? She asked, genuinely curious. He shook his head. Not really. But that's a lot of money and comfort to turn down. Money and comfort without freedom is a prison, she said simply. I learned that lesson well. The winter of 1877 brought heavy snows to New Mexico territory, confining the Everett family to their home for weeks at a time. They used the enforced isolation to plan for the future, expanding the ranch, adding more livestock, perhaps building a proper schoolhouse on their property for Samuel and other children in the area as they grew. By spring, Beatrice had news to share once again. Their second child was due in late autumn. Tom's joy was as profound as it had been the first time, his protective instincts even stronger now that they had established so much to safeguard. A brother or sister for Samuel, he said, watching their son, now nearly 2, attempting to help his mother gather eggs from the chicken coop. Our family is growing just like our ranch. Beatrice smiled, resting her hand on her still flat stomach. From nothing to everything in 3 short years. Not nothing, Tom corrected gently. You've always been something extraordinary, Beatrice. From the moment you chose your own destiny and jumped into that river. In October of 1878, their daughter Elizabeth was born during a spectacular sunrise that painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Unlike her brother's birth, which had required the midwife's assistance, Elizabeth arrived quickly with only Tom present to help bring her into the world. She's impatient, this one. Beatrice laughed tiredly as Tom placed the swaddled infant in her arms. Couldn't even wait for Mrs. Martinez to arrive. She's perfect, Tom said, his voice thick with emotion as he gazed at his wife and daughter. Just like her mother. Samuel, curious about his new sister, was allowed to climb carefully onto the bed to meet Elizabeth. Baby, he said solemnly, patting her tiny hand with his chubby fingers. That's right, Sam, Tom confirmed. Your sister. You'll need to help protect her as she grows. The boy nodded with all the seriousness a 2-year-old could muster, accepting his new responsibility without question. As the years passed, the Everett Ranch flourished along with their family. By 1885, they owned one of the most successful cattle operations in the territory. Their house had grown to accommodate not only their 4 children, Samuel, Elizabeth, James, and Catherine, but also the occasional traveler or new settler in need of temporary lodging. Beatrice, now 30, had become known throughout the region for her generosity and strength. She taught the children of Roswell to read and write in the schoolhouse that she and Tom had helped build. She organized aid when drought threatened local farmers, and she offered shelter to more than one young woman seeking escape from difficult circumstances. Tom, at 40, was respected as one of the territory's most successful ranchers and a fair employer, who treated his growing number of hands with dignity regardless of their background. The scars on his back from his own difficult childhood visible only to Beatrice, served as a reminder of why he fought so hard to create a just community around them. Together, they had built not just a ranch but a legacy of freedom and compassion. One evening, as they sat on their expanded porch watching their children play in the yard, Tom reached for Beatrice's hand. 10 years ago today, he said quietly, I pulled a half-drowned woman from the Mississippi River. Beatrice smiled, squeezing his fingers. Best day of my life. Mine too, he admitted, though I didn't know it at the time. They watched as Samuel, now 9 and showing every sign of becoming as skilled a horseman as his father, helped 5-year-old Catherine climb onto a gentle pony. Elizabeth, 7 and fiercely independent, was attempting to teach James, 3, how to lasso a fence post with a small rope Tom had made for them. You ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been fishing that night? Tom asked. Beatrice considered the question seriously. I believe I was meant to be found, she said finally. If not by you, then by someone. But I'm eternally grateful it was you, Thomas Everett. No one else would have understood what I needed, not rescue, but freedom. He lifted their joined hands, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. And I'm grateful for your courage. Jumping into that river not knowing what waited on the other side takes a special kind of bravery. Or desperation, she added with a wry smile. Either way, it brought you to me. To us, he said, gesturing to their children and the home they had built together. And I thank God for it every day. As the sun set over their ranch, painting the New Mexico sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Beatrice leaned her head against her husband's shoulder. The river that had nearly claimed her life had instead delivered her to a future beyond anything she could have imagined in her previous existence. From those frigid waters had emerged a woman of strength and purpose, loved not as property but as an equal partner in creating something meaningful and lasting. I love you, Thomas Everett, she said softly, for fishing me out, for riding away with me, and for every moment since. And I love you, Beatrice Everett, he replied, his voice rich with a decade of shared experiences, for trusting me enough to build this life together. As their children's laughter echoed across the ranch, they sat contentedly side by side, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky, each one a bright point of light in a universe that had once seemed so dark, but now shone with possibility and hope. The desperate leap into the Mississippi River that had seemed like an end had proven to be just the beginning of a remarkable journey, one that had carried Beatrice from the depths of despair to the heights of joy, from the restrictive society of St. Louis to the freedom of the New Mexico territory, and from a woman with no choices to one who had chosen love, family, and a life of her own making. And Thomas Everett, who had once been content with solitude, had found in Beatrice not only a wife but a partner who matched him in courage and determination. Together, they had created something neither could have built alone, a home where freedom was valued above all, where compassion guided their actions, and where love flowed as steadily and surely as the river that had brought them together.